Hello everyone, my name is Keith, and in this video we're taking a look at this behemoth of an RS3 Pro on the SmallRig ring. This setup is set up in underslung mode, and we're powering everything with this one V-mount battery. So we're powering our Ronin, our camera, and our Ninja 5 with one battery. That's nice because one battery powers this entire rig, so you're not looking after the Ronin battery, your monitor, and your camera battery separately. It's just if one battery dies, you swap it out for a new V-mount battery and everything is instantly powered up again. So I'm going to take this apart. I'm going to leave the gimbal in underslung mode. I have another video going over all of the different configurations with the ring and the RS3 Pro. So I'm not gonna go over all those in this video, but I'll leave a link to that at the end if you are looking to start from scratch with this ring. There's also a couple things that I've added to this, like these bongo ties here, to kind of better manage the excess wires, but you do need some excess wires because your camera still moves around, and if you don't have excess wires, you're going to immediately start pulling your gimbal with this power cable, for example, or you're going to put a lot of tension on your HDMI port of your camera if you're routing the image to your monitor. So there's a couple things that I kind of tweaked with this setup to make it as safe and reliable as possible. So yeah, let's take this apart and start building. So now that our main rig is disassembled, I still have the gimbal in underslung mode, and I have the remote that comes with the ring attached to the gimbal. So when we turn the gimbal on, we can use our remote on the side of our gimbal here to actually use and talk to our RS3 whenever we're using this, so we don't have to move our hand over to the gimbal to start recording or move the gimbal around, for example. But let's start by putting our V-mount battery plate onto our rig. This V-mount battery adapter is the SmallRig crab mount, which is an awesome name, but also it is nice because you can use this adapter to actually attach a V-mount battery to any kind of a tube like this or on a tripod. Those legs are great, so you don't have to make a whole rig out of your camera. SmallRig did reach out to me and offer to send me some of these parts, but they have no influence on this video. All words are my own, and they sent me these parts and just kind of let me make whatever video I wanted. So I really love making these build videos. So thank you, SmallRig, for sending this out. Next, we're going to add our V-mount battery, and this is the ZG Cine V99 V-mount battery. This is one I've been testing out for a little while to make a video on. This is a great budget V-mount battery that also has a D-tap and a USB-C power delivery out port, like my FX Lion battery has, but this is at a significantly cheaper price point. For the ports on this specific build, we're going to be using the D-tap on the front of the V-mount power adapter for actually powering our RS3 Pro. We're going to be using one D-tap on our V-mount battery to actually power the plate that powers our camera. And then we're going to be using the 8-volt on the back to power our monitor. Kind of getting ahead of myself, but that is the rough layout of how we're actually going to power all of this stuff. Speaking of powering our camera, let's remove this plate right here that holds our camera on the gimbal. And to do this, it took me longer than I cared to admit to figure out how to remove this piece right here. But if you unscrew this piece all the way, there's a little, it is the same texture as the locks on the gimbal arms, but there's another lock on the bottom of this arm that points straight down. So you have to actually toggle this arm over and it will just slide straight down. So there's a little toggle switch on the end of this that will actually lock this in place. In case this comes unscrewed, your camera won't just fall straight off of the gimbal in underslung mode, which that's a good thing, but it took me a long time to figure out how to actually remove the camera from that plate. And this is the SmallRig power pass-through plate that we'll be using to power our camera. This will be taking D-tap from our battery, where we will route the camera down the handle, and then we will be using this OB302 connector to have our power into this plate. And then we will have two D-tap connectors and a 7.4 volt that we will actually be using for our camera in this build. When we're putting our plate on, we don't have to do anything with this switch on the bottom. We can just take our pass-through power plate, make sure the power connector is in the rear if you're in underslung mode, and simply slide it up onto the arm, and then you can tighten it down in any orientation. Don't put your camera on and start balancing everything right now, because once we get cables and all kinds of stuff on here, your balance will be completely off. So now with our stock plate removed and the SmallRig power pass-through plate on our gimbal, we'll take our stock camera sled and we will put it from back to front onto our gimbal. So now with this power pass-through plate added, we can add our camera, but make sure to add your dummy battery first, because with this configuration, most of the time with these lenses I'm using, the camera is in the middle of the sled and you don't have access to the actual camera door for the battery. So I've done that a couple of different times and I've had to take the camera off, put the battery on, and then put it back on. Not the biggest deal, but something to be aware of. So now we can put our camera on the gimbal. So now with our camera on the gimbal, we have all of this leftover cable to take care of. I haven't found a great way to take care of this other than just wrapping it around the power pass-through plate. And this DC connector actually does have a right angle on it, so you can have this kind of wrapping in the direction. It's, you know, not super ideal cable management. Ideally, you'd have a dummy battery with less cable here. I haven't found one of those yet. If you do, please leave me a link to that in the description. I would love to check that out. But for now, just wrapping the actual cable, dummy battery cable around twice, and then putting it into the 7.4 volt DC barrel connector here would actually power our camera as long as we can power this plate. To get power to our pass-through plate, we're gonna have to use a D-tap and then run it down this leg of our ring here, and then put it to the power adapter to our pass-through plate. This power cable comes in the box with the pass-through plate, so we're going to start by putting this into the D-tap of our V-mount battery plate, and then I have been typically running this down the side of our ring and putting it kind of like curling it down. And then once you get to the bottom here, I still want to be very tight up here because the cable from here up should never move. But just because the gimbal is on a ring and this will be moving back and forth, you want a fair amount of slack in here so when the camera actually tilts and moves, it's not going to pull on this and, you know, restrict the motion too much of your gimbal. So what I've been doing before I plug this in, I actually take and make sure this is nice and snug and comfortable on this hand grip. And then I'll take a bongo tie and just put the bongo tie around the bottom so it will actually snug up this slack. And if something pulls on this, it still has a little bit of give, but it's going to actually lock this pretty nicely in place. And it just tidies up the cable management. So if we're not using this and there's more slack, there's no slack up here. This will always be nice and tight. This is just something that I ran into. I hated the cable management whenever it came to using all of these wires and different powering options, but this has been the cleanest option I've found so far and the safest, so I'm not going to put any more stress on these power ports. So now we're gonna take our 302 power here and put it into the power plate. And this is actually labeled power on the back of this plate. So there's only one connector for this, so you can't get this one wrong as long as you're using the correct cable. This is only for power in, and all of the other D-taps and the DC connector in front are output power. So you can't power this any other way other than this cable right here. So now that our camera has power thanks to this pass-through plate, we're going to take the other D-tap to OB302 connector, and this one I will actually use the other D-tap connector on here and put it into the front of this battery adapter for our ring to our RS3 Pro. So this is the shorter adapter that comes in the box with our power adapter. I have more about this adapter in my other video, so again, I'll leave that linked at the end if you want to figure out a little bit more about that. But yeah, let's hook that up and then we will be able to have power from our V-mount battery to our RS3 Pro. So now that our RS3 Pro is powered with this D-tap power cable right here, I actually had to switch my D-tap power cables because the cable management was a little cleaner to have the Ronin be powered with the front D-tap port and the pass-through power plate running to the back of the V-mount battery. So that was just a little cable management tidy up I did. And now that those are on, we're going to use a dual ball head grip and actually use the attachment point that comes with the RS3 Pro ring. So this is nice because it has a 3/8 and a 1/4 inch that we can actually screw anything into. So this is nice if you want to just really attach anything, but we're going to be using this just regular 1/4 to ball head, which is nice because I usually use monitor mounts when I'm mounting my monitors on a rig. But this is nice because you can get a little bit more reach with this ball head. And I find myself kind of offsetting the monitor a little bit forward, so it keeps all the weight forward on these longer feet. Again, I go over kind of weight distribution in my other video, so again, I'll leave that at the end. And if you haven't watched that one, definitely check it out. It's a little long, but it's a good watch, and it goes over all of the different options for powering and mounting this. So let's actually add this dual ball head grip onto this, and I'll put my monitor on there as well. And then we will set up our HDMI cables and power cables. So now that our monitor is on the front of our gimbal, and it's actually leaning slightly forward because of this dual ball head grip here, not only does that help with the weight distribution over these feet, but if we were to unlock this axis here, we can actually move our camera around and it doesn't hit anything under normal use. Like I wouldn't put my camera this far when I'm using it. Really, I would just need it to be 180 degrees in front of me. Even then, it's still, I probably only need 90 degrees in front of me, but this still has full range of motion to, if you need to move the camera with this remote here, you can still move it without it hitting any of the monitors or the V-mount battery here. I'll be using this short DC power cable to go from the 8-volt of our V-mount battery plate to the dummy battery plate that comes with the Atomos Ninja 5 in the box. This is the one that you can use the charger with and just plug it to DC power and use it indefinitely. So I'm reusing that on this setup, and this power cable plugs perfectly into that battery plate. So now all of our rig is powered off of this one V-mount battery. But there's one thing to do. We have to plug the HDMI into our camera so we can actually get that video feed. So again, like I did with this bongo tie here, I'll actually be using the HDMI cable and plugging this into the monitor and making it be very tight running down the actual sides of the ring, and then putting a bongo tie here. So whenever our camera is moving, the HDMI cable still has enough slack to move with the camera and not put any unnecessarily strain on the HDMI port on the camera, because that is one of the most delicate parts of this whole process, and having enough cable that you can actually move with the camera and not put any stress on that is important. But you also don't want to be having way too much cable on your setup. That cable management really kind of gets in the way. So I have found this cable on Amazon. I don't think this can do ProRes RAW. So if you're going to be doing ProRes RAW with the Ninja 5 on your, this is the FX30, this cable will not allow you to do that. I tried to use both of these cables, and the Condor Blue cable didn't really work if you're going to be moving the camera around at all. And then the official Atomos cable, it technically worked, but it put a lot of strain on the camera. And if you moved the camera more than about, maybe 20, 30 degrees in either way, it started to really put a lot of stress on these gimbal motors. So I went on Amazon and found this cable. I ordered a ton of cables, and I don't remember which one this exactly is. I'll have to look it up on my order history. All this stuff will be linked in the description, but I found this one was long enough to go from the top of the ring, go down the actual ring, and then be bongo tied and have enough slack to actually be safe to use with this camera and still be able to move back and forth without putting a lot of strain on the camera HDMI port itself. So I ordered so many HDMI cables for this video, and I finally found this one. This was the bottleneck to me really making this video and using this setup. So yeah, I'll put this on, and I'll put the bongo tie on, and I'll run you guys through that a little bit more in a second. So with our HDMI cable installed and all of the slack is pretty tight up here, and then I've bongo tied it down here by this lower handle. Now we have all kinds of slack up here that when we actually move the camera around, there's enough slack that it doesn't put a lot of extra pressure on those HDMI ports. And if your camera is right here and then you let go of it, it doesn't want to fight back and like I said, put a lot of stress on those ports. So this is the cleanest setup I've found with, running a cable down this handle and a cable down this handle. So really keeping these wires as tight as possible where you don't need any extra slack, and then having the appropriate slack where you actually need more leniency with your gimbal is really important. So the final piece that I like to add to this setup, and this isn't really necessary, but this is something that I like to do because I like to get shots low to the ground. And with this setup, shots that are lower to the ground, you can get them, but it just puts a little bit more strain on you. So I found using the gimbal in underslung mode, you actually have access to a couple of 1/4-20s and 3/8 on the top of this plate here. So you can actually add a NATO quick release rail and then take a NATO quick release handle, or a 1/4-20 handle if you prefer that way. I prefer the NATO handles because they're really easy to put on. And if you have like handheld rigs, this makes it really easy to swap handles between different rigs quickly. So now you can have a top handle on this rig. And this is nice because if you try to pick up either side of here, you can generally pick up the monitor mount side pretty easily, but the V-mount battery side is really difficult to actually handle when you're out filming low angles. And only being able to have access to one side, if you were to pick up the gimbal even close to the middle, it's always going to want to veer one way. But if you have the top handle and you pick it up, the weight is naturally distributed in the center and it's going to not want to veer as much. So this is nice to have a centralized, easy place to get low angle shots. And if you need some more stability, you can put your other hand here with this monitor mount. But the V-mount battery plate really kind of hinders a lot of hand holding on this side of the ring. So that's one way I got around getting low shots. Maybe I'm just starting to get old and I don't like to just carry around super heavy rigs all the time. I mean, this is a really heavy rig, but being able to put it down and not be fighting it when you're holding it from one direction is something that was making this much easier to use. If you have an easy rig, that will probably be the best bet, but I don't have an easy rig or any rig to stabilize my camera, so I'm usually just running around manhandling these cameras, just holding them up all day long. So maybe in the future that should be something I can get, but this has been the rig build. I guess we can turn it on, huh? Turn on the power plate here, turn on the RS3 Pro, monitor first, and turn on our camera. My balance is so bad. Don't judge me for my poorly balanced gimbal. I'll fix that, hold on a second. Oh, perfect. All right, so now that my gimbal balance is better, since we have this controller attached to the gimbal itself, we can talk to the remote on the side of the ring, and in theory, we should be able to move our gimbal left and right and up and down, and then be able to recenter as well. And that's nice, so we can be using our ring with our actual handles here, and we can actually move the ring and move the camera back and forth, and then with our hands on the handle still recenter the gimbal. So that's been really nice. I've been loving that part of the ring. I almost got another ring that didn't have any kind of remote functionality on it, and I didn't think it would be that big of a deal, but having these controls right here has been a lifesaver, and being able to stop recording and move the gimbal around and recenter has been really nice. One thing to note about this setup though, it does have limited range, and do not put this into flashlight mode or any mode that will invert all of the axes and make it do, anything other than pretty much upright straight filming. Another thing to note is whenever you are locking the gimbal, you want to have your gimbal settings to recenter and lock, and not fold and lock. If you set the fold and lock right now, when you shut your gimbal off, the RS3 Pro will actually not realize it's attached to any other things, and it will just completely fold in, and it will put a lot of stress on these different ports. So make sure you're using recenter and lock for your lock settings in your gimbal. This is the inverted version of this. You can also switch this around and have it going right side up. One benefit to that setup is that you will have access to the screen. Right now, I can't see the screen of my RS3 Pro because in underslung mode, if I went to recenter the gimbal and the screen was facing me, the gimbal would think it wants to recenter towards me, because whenever you have the gimbal in underslung mode, that's just its focus is towards the screen. That could be a problem. So if you don't like that and you are constantly going to your screen back and forth during your shoot, if you flip this up right side up, you can actually have access to your screen, and whenever you recenter your gimbal, you'll have access to your screen and it will recenter the correct way. Like I said earlier, I have a video going over all of the different configurations and powering options for the RS3 Pro and the Ring. I'll leave that video on screen now, and I just want to say thank you guys for sticking around to the end, and I'll see you in the next one. Also, I used the 35mm G Master for this one, which has horrible focus breathing on the A7S III that doesn't have focus breathing compensation, so I apologize if the background was kind of looking like it was zooming.